Emma, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me back.
That's my pleasure. The first one really popped off, actually. Nutrition 101. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out on YouTube and Spotify. It's our second most viewed video ever on YouTube. So that's pretty cool. I think the way you covered kind of the basics of nutrition and the way you broke it down was really manageable. I want to make a pun about bite-sized chunks, but it kind of was. But I actually had some really good feedback directly. People messaging me saying that one was really cool. So
yeah, and actually I've got a lot of friends and family that watched it that have probably never seen me speak professionally, and they were like, "Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that's what you did." So it was, yeah, I got a similar lovely feedback as well, which was really nice.
That's awesome. I'm conscious that the first one was maybe a little bit vanilla for you, given that you really are a specialist in your field. So I think off the back of the feedback we had, it was obvious for me anyway that we had to come and do a second one and really get into the depth of what it is you specialize in. A congratulations is in order. A recent appointment has been made. Would you just like to share with the group?
Yeah, so I'm really honoured to have joined the gastroenterology specialist group of the British Dietetic Association, and I've been made chair of that group. It's a really exciting position, actually. I think we've got a really good opportunity to really support our gastro-dietetic colleagues, and then also contribute to moving forward with our profession. So yeah, really excited about it. We've got a fantastic team, particularly a social media team. So we'll make sure that they get all this uploaded as well. Really excited. Really happy to have been part of the team.
No, it's incredible, and a massive congratulations. I should put a small caveat at the beginning of this podcast to the listeners and the viewers that I'm a little bit out of my depth with this subject matter. So I'm gonna try my best. I think it's an incredibly important message to share. I know for a fact it's something that many people struggle with or are curious about. And whilst I have a pretty solid understanding of nutrition as a whole, when it comes to how the body kind of works around that, particularly around gut health, I am out of my depth. So if it looks like I'm out of my depth, I am. Please bear with me. But let's start with something that I've heard you speak about before: gut-brain interaction.
Absolutely. That's predominantly where my NHS work has been over the last few years. And I think a lot of people don't realise that IBS has kind of been recategorised under the umbrella term, a disorder of gut-brain interaction. So actually anything that kind of comes under that functional pain, functional dyspepsia, all of those conditions that perhaps don't have a definitive diagnosis from, things like Crohn's disease, celiac disease, where there's a real, a physiological thing going on there. Anything else kind of comes under this disorder of gut-brain interaction umbrella term, really. Your gut and your brain interact constantly, and it's a bi-directional relationship. So your gut can influence your brain, and how your brain is functioning can affect your gut. So it's more to do with your vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve then can, pick up on what's going on in your gut and send that straight up to your brain. And it's the way that I really kind of explain it is on a simple level. If you think when you get excited, you get butterflies. That's your gut, your brain telling your gut that something is going on. Same way that when you get bad news, you get that pang in your stomach. It's exactly the same thing. Your gut and your brain are quite literally talking to each other all the time. So it's exactly the same when we're thinking about IBS and we're thinking about bloating, and perhaps if you've got bloating and your gut wall is sort of being distended, pain signals are then sent up to your brain to kind of recognize that there is bloating going on and there is pain and discomfort. So that's sort of where the bidirectional element comes in. It's not just the brain and the gut, it's the gut going up to the brain as well. But your gut can affect everything, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, I think, a lot more as this goes on. But it can affect your sleep, your neurotransmitters, it can affect your nutrient delivery, it can affect things like weight gain and weight loss. You may have heard that there's been studies on twins, one twin being obese and one twin being of a normal BMI, and actually their gut microbiome is completely different, and they think it might be to do with that. So even in twin studies, there's a lot of some really interesting data about how your gut microbiome can affect all these things. And I'm sure you've seen those twins. One of them's a doctor, or both of them a doctor. I think it's Xander. They've done lots of twin studies, him and his brother, sort of a few Channel 4 documentaries, but they're incredible. And they do stuff together where one of them eats McDonald's and one of them eats a healthy diet, matching for calories and protein. But, you know, just the effect it has on your gut and your body, and the quality of the food going in and how that affects your gut. I think that just highlights how important, like, the quality of food going into your gut can then affect your brain and how everything else works as well. So it's a very complex relationship, but actually boiling it down to the simplicity level, it's being aware of how they interact makes a big difference. A lot of what we talk about in my clinics at the moment is being more in tune with that gut-brain interaction. I've got a lot of patients that have gone through every diet under the sun. They've done FODMAPs, they've done every treatment, they've sent off for intolerance tests, spent a small fortune on things. And it's not until they've perhaps done gut-targeted hypnotherapy or gut-targeted cognitive behavioral therapy that their symptoms have improved, because it's that interaction that's sort of heightened and the sensitivity has been way turned up, that they've actually managed to address it, turn the sensitivity down, and then have an improvement in their symptoms. So I do a lot of chat about diet, but a lot of my chat is about that gut-brain interaction work, which you wouldn't always expect from a dietitian, but it's so important, and it'll be irresponsible of me to not address it, I think, from a patient perspective.
That's really interesting. And excuse me, you mentioned the vagus nerve. It's fascinating for me to hear that linked with this, because my, I guess, understanding of it, or my introduction to the vagus nerve and what it does, I've never considered it in that regard. It's always been things like anxiety related, arousal related, mental health, that kind of and so to link it to gut health just wasn't even in the picture for me, which is really fascinating.
Definitely. And if you think that anxiety is something that your brain is processing, and your gut will then pick up on that, it's all the same. It's we are one person. And I think that's what a lot of the time I'm pointing out to my patients, is saying, this isn't just about the food that you're eating. This is about the anxiety that then comes with the fear of eating food. If you're then scared to get symptoms, the anxiety is then higher, which means you're more likely to have worsening symptoms because of the increased anxiety. So it is a really vicious circle, I think, with a lot of these symptoms. It isn't just eat better and it will get better. If you're scared of eating in the first place, that will make everything else worse. So yeah, I think we really try and pick it apart and kind of go, hang on, is there a fear and an anxiety, and even depression? I've had it time and time again where I say to patients, have you been going through a lot recently? And they went, oh yeah, I've gone through that divorce, or I've lost my mum, or I'm going through, I'm doing a PhD. I've got so many like academics and teachers that come through my service, because if you've got a high stress job, if you're already running, a really high level, quite often the food intake takes a bit of a back seat, and then you don't eat as well because you're stressed. And then that has an effect on how your gut microbiome is. And then that will have an effect on how your neurotransmitters work. And then that will have an effect on your anxiety. And then you just start this whole vicious circle again. So sometimes breaking the cycle is actually the first point of treatment, I suppose, for IBS. It's working out what is the thing that's really going to fix this. Because some people aren't that stressed at all. Some people are like, no, I'm mainly stressed about my bowel symptoms. So you're like, well, maybe doing a gut targeted CBT course isn't going to be the thing that's going to help you now. Maybe the diet stuff is more relevant for that group. So I think that's why, for me, when I'm seeing my patients, I ask all of the questions. I understand, what is the stress level? What's your sleep like? What is your exercise level like? Who do you live with? Is it a good dynamic? Because more often than not, that stressful roommate that you're sharing your house sharing with is contributing to your stress, and then that's making it worse. So yeah, it's a much bigger picture than just the vagus nerve. It's everything that then ties into it all, isn't it? So yeah,
it's really fascinating. So generally, where do you tend to find you start with a patient? Because you mentioned all of these items that are related. But is it a case of, let's start with getting the food right, or do you manage them simultaneously, or does it depend on what they come back with in terms of answers?
That's a good question, actually, because everyone's so different that there isn't one answer. Because I will ask everything in clinic. I really want to know what all of these potential triggers could be, even to the point of getting an antibiotic history. Because if you've had recurrent antibiotics for other conditions, that's affecting your gut microbiome, and then actually probiotics might be more of a priority than just doing CBT. So I will ask everything. I want to know about your menstruation history. Are you on any hormonal contraceptives? Your sleep, who you live with. I really do go into the detail, because it's amazing how there's one question, if you don't ask it, you've missed out a whole bit of the puzzle. So once I've kind of gathered all of that information and worked out what's happened, then we can make a plan. For most people, when you're seeing a dietitian, you're expecting food advice. So I'll always be able to give some sort of advice. Even if actually someone's diet is pretty perfect, there may be some IBS triggers that are really obvious to a gastro dietitian who's trained to understand where those bits of the diet we need to be, what those bits we need to be changing are. So no, normally dietary advice as a given, probiotics most of the time, I would say, because we're always talking about the gut microbiome in IBS. And then it's about having that discussion about mental health and just approaching where someone's at with it. There are some patients that come to me and say, I'm really stressed. I know this is a trigger for me. Fine. We've got a really good open door there to have that conversation. And somebody might say to me, I'm a really highly strung personality. I like things to be really particular. I know I need my regimented things. I need prescriptive diet advice. Then you might give them more structure. Whereas some people might be incredibly overwhelmed at the thought of having to change their diet. And actually, they just need one thing at a time. So I really do just base it on each patient, because you just don't know what someone's motivation is going to be. Some people do everything and they will do it all at once, and they will sign up to that hypnotherapy course, and they will sign up to whichever app I tell them to do it for. They do the diet to the nth degree. And some people go, oh, I'll just do that one thing next week and see how I get on. And then the month after that, I might do this other thing. So I'm very, very guided by the motivation levels, the barriers to change, stress levels. Yeah, everyone's so different. I wish if it was a one size fit all and a diet sheet, I'd be out of a job.
Right, of course, yeah.
It just doesn't work like that with IBS, and that whole disorder of gut-brain interaction umbrella of conditions. Treat it individually, because it's so personal to everyone.
It's really interesting. I'm probably going to be a little bit selfish during this, because I'm someone who's struggled with, I guess it's IBS essentially, but predominantly bloating. And I'm not saying this to show off and look cool. I'm just kind of saying it as a fact. Like, in terms of body fat, my body fat's I've always been quite skinny, quite lean. And so even when my abs are visible currently, there will be a level of bloating. So in a t-shirt, you might go, what's going on there? It kind of looks a bit like a beer gut. And I take my shirt off and you kind of go, but hang on, he's also got abs. I don't understand. But you were talking interestingly that I'm someone who is meticulous with their training, their diet, their sleep. I really buy into all of this stuff. But we were saying just before we hit record, I'm also an individual that does require a base level of stress. I'm quite a high octane. I use the example of being like a traditional red personality profile, type A, kind of go forward and attack. So actually, I wonder if there's a link there. Yes, I'm kind of doing the food stuff right, the sleep, the nutrition, the exercise, etc., the mental health stuff. But maybe there's something in my kind of wiring that is having a knock-on effect, and I'm sure we'll discuss that in a consultation in the future. But
it's a really good point. And if you think about the hormones that are released when you are stressed, when you're anxious, when you're depressed, that puts your body at a slightly higher level of stress, and then that can then affect how your gut and your brain interact, and actually it can turn the sensitivity up. It can affect the balance of different bacteria in your gut, and it could be that if you've got an imbalance of that bacteria, that can mean that your gut's, I don't know, fermenting slightly more or interacting with certain nutrients in your gut more, then that can contribute to bloating. There's a real domino effect from the stress hormones. So having that low level of stress, even though that's your baseline, if it's higher than what your body can potentially cope with and tolerate, then that might be something that could be contributing towards it. But I will also add that that's without me doing a dietary assessment on you. I don't know if there's a food going into your diet. I don't know if there's anything else going on that could be contributing towards it. Another thing I will add, and actually where you are in that fitness space, I guess a lot of particularly younger people, probably in their 20s, that really want to get fit, get that muscle mass up, particularly where weight training has become so much more of a thing in recent years. And everyone's right, I'm having my protein shakes, I'm having my protein bars. protein shakes and protein bars can contain additional sort of whey protein, and that is they contain fermentable sugars in that, and then that can contribute to IBS and be an IBS trigger. So actually a lot of the time it's sometimes a bit of an easy win. I mean, you're always having diarrhea after you go to the gym because you've had a massive protein shake. It's probably that. So I always find it interesting talking to someone that perhaps is bloated, that goes to the gym and does technically everything right as far as exercise and activity goes. If you're literally having that protein shake every day and that protein bar and then lots of other fermentable foods in your diet, then that accumulation in your gut is what's going to contribute. So yeah, it could be that, further down the line, we do manage to pick it apart and go, oh yeah, it's probably actually that food you're having on repeat every day or every other day. That's why that diet history is so important, that exercise history is so important, because everyone's so different. And it's amazing how much comes out of my consultations that patients never think to tell you, but it's not until you ask that question that you go, there we go, light bulb moment, that will do it.
Yeah, it's all in the questioning. It's interesting you talk about the protein supplements. I actually haven't consumed protein, and we're not doing a consultation here. I'm just trying to here. But I really agree with your point. I haven't taken protein supplements for years because I just can't. They just there's something about that. I don't know if this is the right term, but it's like a synthesized protein almost. It doesn't feel like it's not like whole food. It's not real.
A lot of it's the fermentable sugar element really that we focus on, because quite often there's lots of added sugars added into the like the whey protein powder that they use, as well as then additional ingredients. And there's so much more to it than just the protein element. Actually, the protein bit can be digested quite well. It's the undigested sugars that tend to be more of the problem with things like protein shakes. Yeah,
fascinating. You mentioned gut microbiome. This is something that I'm super curious about, because we live in a world now, because of the kind of fitness craze that we're seeing across the board. Like we talked about last time, I think on the first podcast, when we talked about foods that just have in big bold letters the word protein on the packaging. And people go, protein. I kind of feel with gut health it's a little bit the same. You'll see products on supermarket shelves, on adverts on TV, talking about how this is going to help your gut microbiome and your gut health. So would you be able to just give us a bit of a tour into what that actually is, what it means, so maybe we can guide ourselves in future?
Yeah, definitely. It's a very frustrating corner of food production, I think, because there's not that much regulation and people can kind of advertise quite freely that these things are, will help your gut health, but not everything is backed up by evidence and studies. So the products that do have sort of evidence for helping with gut health, they quite often have their own studies available quite often on their website. I know there are certain yogurt brands that have done their own internal studies that, that strain of bacteria helps with constipation, for example. They can sort of claim that they help with constipation because they've done studies on it. Yes, there'll be smaller studies. They might, they're obviously running them themselves, so there is a big bias there, but at least there is some evidence to go, okay, this may help with this symptom. And I think that's what the advice I'd always give for anything that says gut health on it. If it's claiming to help a symptom that you've got, then great. It's more likely to be one that's going to benefit you. But if it just says this is good for your gut health, but with no actual claims on it, you've got to think, well, how, why, what is it meant to be treating? Because I think that is the big thing at the moment, is everybody's jumping on gut health as a label, as this like immaculate food. It's almost meant to be sort of clean, healthy eating, and it's meant to improve your gut microbiome. But I think it's a very confusing space, because there are foods that are then IBS triggers, and then you end up not knowing where to start. Particularly some of the yogurt drinks that are around at the moment, are they just very expensive ways of getting some of these foods in? I mean, some of these little yogurt drinks can be £2 or £3 a pot. I think Marks and Spencer's have got one at the moment that's, I think, £3 maybe, £2-3 for maybe 1,500 meals. And you're thinking, could I have had a tablet with the similar thing in that's got more evidence behind it, or perhaps a broader range of different strains of bacteria in that might be more suited for the symptoms that I've got. There's a fantastic website that I use that has recently been reviewed. I think there's got lots of dietitians that have been involved in it and researchers from King's, and it basically has a list of all of the different strains of bacteria, what products they're in, and their indication, because there are some probiotics that claim to help constipation. There are some that claim to help IBS. I think there's one that claims to help mastitis. So, you know, depending on what symptom you've got, you're not necessarily going to benefit from all of them. So I refer to that quite a lot, just to kind of go, well, hang on, you've got antibiotic associated diarrhea. This one has got some evidence to show it helps with that. So at least you're not going in completely blind with it. So I think for me, my advice is always pick a product that claims to help the symptoms that you've got when it comes to probiotics. And this is probiotic specific now. This is different to those functional foods and kefir and things like that.
Okay.
But probiotics in particular, take it for 4 weeks. So it takes about 4 weeks for your colon to kind of really build up that good bacteria that you're getting into with these products. And if it doesn't make a difference after 4 weeks, then maybe it's worth moving on to a different strain or a different product. Some products say 12 weeks. So it really depends on the manufacturer's guidelines, but minimum 4 weeks for most of these products. And if it does help, then carry on. It's amazing how many of my patients have said to me, oh my gosh, that tablet that I took that you told me about has changed the game for me. So some people, it's a game changer. They're very low risk tablets to take. They're very unlikely to cause you any harm or damage, which is why I think we're like, no, let's try and get these into our gut and our diet. But then, yeah, there's the flip side. There's the functional foods. There's the foods that are good for our gut, that contain lots of what we know as prebiotics, which are different to probiotics. Prebiotics are essentially kind of like fibers that stay within our gut and actually help to feed the gut bacteria. So they are good gut health foods because they help to feed, and you know, our gut bacteria thrive on these foods. However, some of them contain fermentable sugars and then can contribute to you know, gut symptoms if you have you know, gut hypersensitivity and, you know, sit in that IBS kind of corner. That won't be the same for everyone, but a lot of people that do have gut symptoms will eat these foods out of desperation and wanting to get their gut symptoms better, and actually it makes them worse, and they can't understand why because it says gut health on it. Mm-hmm. So health is only health is personal, because what is healthy for one person isn't necessarily healthy for the other person. So you've got to work out what's your priority, and for a lot of people, worsening gut symptoms is not health, so therefore those gut health foods are not helping with their overall health. And that's where you have to really unpick the marketing element of food. It's a real minefield. I get a lot of patients just emailing me pictures of products going, can I eat this, or is this a good idea? It's very confusing, and I can totally understand why people don't even know where to start with gut health foods.
And you know, you touched on something there, which is something that I get quite a lot. And you know, you said about you get people that send you a message and say, "Is this good? Yeah. Yes or no?" You know, and I hear the same in the sense that people will say, the one that gets me all the time, and I might have discussed it with you last time, but I've definitely discussed it on the podcast. They'll say, "Is this healthy?" Right. Define healthy. Yeah. What are we talking about here? So that itself, you know, is so nuanced, right?
It really is. And I think the patients that have the hardest time getting their head around the advice I'm giving are the patients that actually on paper are eating really well. They're ticking all of those healthy eating boxes. If you think about the government Eat Well plate that we really use as the basis of our advice, they're doing that. They're getting their 5 portions of fruit and veg. Some of them are getting way more than that. Sometimes that's part of the problem. They're overdoing the fruit and veg, and that's what's contributing. But you know, they're eating well, almost in that Mediterranean diet style of eating, but they're still having symptoms. And it's because they've then got these IBS triggers in there, these fermentable foods in there. And I have to explain that they're not unhealthy as far as population health goes, but they're not healthy for you because you're then having loose stools, you're having bloating, you're having pain, you're having wind. So I think it's about explaining what health means, because a healthy diet on paper doesn't always translate if you've got IBS symptoms. And that's really it's more about explaining it and just giving the context as to why I'm telling somebody to stop eating that perceptively healthy food, but actually for them probably not the best thing.
That's really interesting. It's something I found actually for myself is that certain vegetables, particularly root vegetables, for me I can't, my body just can't do it. Can't seem to break them down, doesn't like them. And I've actually found myself switching back fairly recently to almost exclusively a meat and fruit diet, which has helped me significantly. And I know I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this, but I'm aware that there's certain people in the social media landscape who have probably given that a bit of a bad name, taking it probably too far. But strength in the gym is still good. My conditioning on the jiu-jitsu mats is still good. And I just generally feel better in myself when I start reducing, obviously fruit is a carbohydrate, but once I'm reducing kind of potatoes or oats or rice.
Yeah, and I think it's a really weird one, actually. It's a really tricky one to answer. And I appreciate that wasn't necessarily a question. It was more of a sharing your side of things.
No, it kind of was a question.
Something that for you works, but we don't know why that's an appropriate thing for you. Whether there is an element of, carbohydrates not being as digested as well, but we don't know why. Whereas other people really need carbohydrates for their fiber intake. And actually, if they don't have the carbohydrates, they are constipated or they're having diarrhea or whatever. So, and they don't have the same effect as you. So I've had patients over the years that have been sensitive and intolerant to really bizarre foods. Peppers is one that comes up more than I ever thought. They're not a fermentable food at all. Some people just cannot have peppers. And I actually had a patient in my clinic earlier who was like, yeah, for some reason, peppers don't agree with me. They actually vomit. And I was like, you're not the first person to say that to me, but we don't always know why. It's really easy with an allergy. Some of the allergies, the more traditional allergies, we know exactly what it is. We know there's a protein element there and our body goes, no, I don't like that. And, allergic response comes. We know IBS triggers. We've got a really well understood mechanism as to why these sugars are fermenting in our gut. And then there's this category of, you can't tolerate that and we don't know why. And I think things like carbohydrates, feeling sensitive to that, is one of them. Random foods that people can't tolerate is also one of them. I'm just thinking about your point there about, but I'm still getting what I need out of the gym. I'm still meeting my goals. I'm still getting muscle mass. I've got a friend who's a professional runner. He does a lot of marathons, and his mentality is, well, as long as I'm eating to meet that goal, does it matter if it's healthy? And I'm like, oh, and it doesn't sit well with me at all, because I'm like, no, you still need fruits and vegetables. He was like, well, if I just eat carbs, that's not a problem, because I'm getting what I need out of my running. And then he'll go on a health kick and perhaps be a bit more balanced, but then he'll go back to the extremes again when he's running. And I'm like, wasn't it better just to keep it stable the whole time? Everyone does have a slightly different view on it. And I think, us talking today about gut health is very different to athletic goals and gains as well. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept that some people really cannot tolerate certain foods despite them technically being healthy and essential for our bodies. And we don't always know why. And that's, again, why I kind of work with people and go, if it doesn't give you worsening symptoms, please include it in your diet. But if you do find there's an adverse effect to it, then that's fine, but make sure there are alternatives going in so that your body isn't missing out on those vital nutrients. That generally tends to be what my party line is, because I can never force anyone to eat anything. I'm not going to force you to eat potatoes if you don't feel that is right for you. It's just one of those things where we have to listen to everybody's bodies, and everyone's so different. And your microbiome will be different to mine, to my next patients, to the rest of your families. And we just have to be really individual with our approach to it, because otherwise, again, I could give you a diet sheet and be out of a job. It just doesn't work that way.
Got it. That was a really well put together answer. You touched a minute ago on prebiotics. Could you just give us a quick over, because we kind of skipped over probiotics. Again, it's something that Activia and God knows what you hear it and on TV, and it's always some like quite pretty woman who's slim and healthy and vibrant, and she's drinking her little yogurt. So what is it?
Yeah, so probiotics are products that have got a particular strain or strains of bacteria added into them at a certain therapeutic dose. And a lot of these companies have done their own internal studies on their products to say, oh, we claim to help with this symptom. So probiotics are generally products that have got it added into them. And that's where things like your Activia, your Actimels, but also loads of tablets. If you were to go to Boots and go to the gut health section of Boots, most of those will be probiotics. And we know that those are the ones that have kind of got evidence to say that they can help with certain symptoms. You've also then got foods we call them functional foods, the ones with the naturally occurring bacteria in. So I'm sure you've heard a lot about Greek yogurt and natural yogurt having a lot of good bacteria in. It absolutely does, and they could be very similar strains to what's in a probiotic. But because Greek yogurt is a natural food source, we don't know the levels of the bacteria that's in there and whether it's a therapeutic dose that's going to actually give you benefit. So kefir is one of the other ones. If you think of kimchi, you know, all of these ones with the fermented sugars in them, and naturally occurring bacteria in them as well. We always say, yeah, absolutely include them in your diet as long as you don't feel that they have an adverse effect. But they are different to probiotics, which are more manufactured product with a specific strain added at a specific dose. Prebiotics are slightly different. So you've got probiotics, prebiotics. The pre is more to do with the fact that the food helps to feed your gut bacteria, and it remains quite whole in the gut. So there's lots of carbohydrates that are prebiotics. There's lots of things like chicory is a prebiotic, for example. Really, like some really random things are as well. So it's they don't get advertised quite as much because the health benefits are different, and actually the probiotics and the gut health element is a little bit more relevant and more buzzy for people these days. But yeah, they're slightly different, but work in a similar way. It's all about improving your gut bacteria, either through feeding it or supplementing it.
Very cool. Something which was really interesting to me when we were kind of setting this second one up, and we were talking about subjects to cover, was the relationship between gut health and sleep. I talk about sleep like I'm sponsored by it, like I'm on commission. It's kind of my go-to. I'm a big believer in not everybody will need the full 7 to 8 to 9 hours, but most people will. There is I think it's called the DEC2 gene, which is a gene mutation whereby, because you hear these people say stuff like, oh, I'm cool on 4 hours, I get by on 5 hours. The likelihood of you having this particular gene mutation, which allows you to function on 4 or 5 hours sleep, because there are these freaks that can do it, is apparently it's the same likelihood of having that gene as being struck by lightning twice. So
far and few.
Sleep, big time.
Sure.
So
yeah,
I never really related sleep and gut health. So could you speak on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, and it ties into what I was saying earlier about it affecting your neurotransmitters and it's all to do with your hormones. And serotonin is one of the hormones and the neurotransmitters that the gut microbiome really kind of helps to produce. So if serotonin is therefore involved in our sleep cycle, and there's a disruption in either the metabolism or the uptake of serotonin in the gut, then that's going to affect how we sleep. And there was some mice studies, I think, found that if antibiotics were given to mice, their serotonin levels were reduced, and therefore those mice had disrupted sleep cycles. So in animal models, we know that there is that interaction between sort of antibiotic use, which then disrupts our gut microbiome, that then affects our serotonin levels and then our sleep cycles. Obviously, these are animal studies, and we don't know the exact application in humans, but it just gives you an idea as to kind of how that metabolic pathway could be working. And I just there's not enough big human randomized control trials to really prove that in humans, but I think a lot of the stuff that has been proven in my studies generally tends to apply quite nicely. It's not gospel, obviously, these are animal studies, but I think it's good to help to understand that it has been shown to disrupt sleep. It can affect your disease risk factors, so it can increase your risk of things like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, other gastro conditions as well. But also, if you think that a lack of sleep can influence your food decisions, and then your food decisions can negatively impact on your gut microbiome. Perhaps you're eating more processed foods, you're having less fruit and vegetables, you're not eating as well. That can affect how your gut microbiome is, and then in turn that will affect your sleep, because the serotonin production could then be impaired. So again, it really ties into that really vicious vicious cycle of lack of sleep affecting your brain then affecting your gut then affecting the serotonin then affecting your sleep then affecting your ability to kind of eat well. So it's to do with the domino effect of it all, really. The way I also explain it is, if your brain isn't rested, your gut's not going to be rested. It's all to do with rest and sleep, and we need that sleep. There's a lot of processes that go on during our sleep and our REM cycles, and it's all to do with kind of resetting everything overnight. So I think having a disruption in those REM cycles or not getting into deep sleep makes a really big difference. Sleep is also one of the things I always ask in my clinics, and we're lucky enough to have access to a couple of sleep services. I think sometimes you do have to be at the proper insomnia end to get access to them, but there's actually some really fantastic apps that you can do. I think there's one called Sleepio, obviously the Headspace apps and Breathe as well. But we ask this a lot to our patients, and it's amazing how many of them say, oh my God, I'm sleeping terribly, or my sleep has gotten worse since my IBS has gotten worse. So again, it's about holding that mirror up to kind of go, well, actually, this isn't just the food. Yes, food's an element, but let's look at that sleep and work out if there's anything that we can do. But there were some studies to show that actually the more diverse your microbiome is, the longer you're meant to sleep for, and actually you have better sleep efficiency as well. So there are more and more studies coming out about it. But yeah, the better the sleep, the better all of it is, I would say. So it's not to disregard it if you're struggling with bowel symptoms and lack of sleep. A lot of young parents, actually, I get a lot of mums in particular coming through my clinic who are just like, I'm exhausted, barely slept for the last 6 years since having 3 kids. So I always make sure that I say to them, this will get better as these kids get older and you get more sleep. Hopefully all of this will get better. But yeah, sleep is unfortunately another key that really unlocks the doors for symptom improvement.
I can see that based on what you said at the beginning of the podcast. You know, sleep is the bedrock generally for mental health. And if, like I say, if you're not sleeping well, the likelihood is you're going to have an increased level of stress. And it comes back to that vagus nerve piece, I guess, about just you're not going to be firing right. And then the knock-on effect. I talked about this on somebody else's podcast recently, actually, about morning and evening routines kind of being almost like bookends of your health. Because, you know, if you wake up tired, let's say you stayed up too late scrolling on your phone last night, which we've all done, you're getting flooded with blue light, and then your mind's racing, or you're emailing clients back and forth, and your sleep's crap, you wake up feeling like shit. The likelihood is you might skip out on the workout. And if you skip out on the workout and you're tired and I don't really want to cook tonight, so I'm just going to grab something on the way home. And then of all people I heard talk about this, I saw an interview with Ed Sheeran, and I don't know the full context. It was just one of those quite clipped up things on Instagram, but he was talking about his relationship with his health. And the knock-on effect, which I found really fascinating, because he's like, if I go out and I have a few beers, I might want a cigarette, and then I might want a kebab on the way home. And I don't sleep well, and I wake up tired, and I'm off, and my work doesn't really get done, and I feel stressed. Versus if you don't go out and have a couple of beers and you sleep well, and you know, I'm big on hydrating in the morning. A lot of people kind of chip away at me with this one, but I'm like, just push your coffee out. And yes, there's some studies to say, look, you can avoid the afternoon crash and the afternoon slump with that. But for more than anything, for me, I've gone 8 hours. I've not really consumed anything. I'm going to get some electrolytes and some fluid back in my body before I put caffeine in. Anyway, the point I'm making is that, you know, setting up that routine, and then you kind of start your day strong. You've had a good, hopefully a high protein breakfast, and then you're ready to go. So I can absolutely see how that is a cycle, and managing that is really crucial.
I couldn't agree more. And I talk a lot about sleep hygiene as well. So it like I said, that bookend of the day, if you've got a really good bedtime routine where you are able to detach from the day, do some mindfulness, do some affirmations, really stuff that really grounds you and gets you back in tune with you. And I do this. I've got a few of my really close girlfriends that I'm really close with. If they're ever having a bad day and we've had a bit of an emotional phone call, I'm like, tell me 5 things that you're grateful for right now. I literally did it with my best friend last night. Tell me 5 things that you're grateful for right now. And we just shared it. And I was like, oh, that's really nice. And that's nice to hear where you're at. And I think just having those positive affirmations, that grounding you to what's important to you, can help drown out the noise and the background stuff, because I think that's also where sleep can be disrupted. We've got a very busy world that we're living in at the moment, and we detach by logging onto the internet, where the rest of the world is on. So if you're going to bed with that, how on earth are you supposed to detach and sleep? And the same with morning. I mean, I'm a big breakfast advocate. Breakfast is, I mean, as a teenager, never ate it. It took me most of my 20s to work out that it was actually a good idea, and that was being a dietitian. Now I'm like, how on earth do we function without breakfast? How on earth do we function with people having coffee on an empty stomach? You know, it's like, cut the stuff out, cut the stimulants out, cut out the stuff that isn't just good nutrition. We are a product of what we eat, and you can tell the people that don't eat well. You know, yes, not everybody obviously necessarily exerts that they don't eat well, but there are some people, you meet them and you kind of go, oh wow, yeah, I can, and tell you're not okay, and I don't know why, and then you start talking about diet, and I'm like, yeah, there we go. And you know, we are a product of our gut. Our gut will tell us how we are. So someone might go, oh yeah, but my hair and my skin and my nails are great. I'm like, yeah, but you're going to the toilet 6 times a day. Your gut's obviously not happy for a reason. So yeah, I'd say your gut and your bowels are a reflection of your health. So yeah, again, health means different things to different people, doesn't it? Your blood test might be normal, but if those bowels are not happy, that's a sign that something's not right in your body. But yeah, I'm a big fan of what you just said. I totally agree with starting the day right, ending the day right, and just yeah, being grounded with it. I think that helps to get us more in tune with what's important, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like, and this is off topic, but I think you touched on something that is really, for me, has been quite significant since becoming a dad. And if I'm honest, I struggled initially with the deceleration of my life. I went from consultant working with senior execs in major organizations, household names, international travel, international time zones, long hours, to being, in the most part, more so over the last couple of months, being more of just a dad, because the workload doesn't allow. My wife's off being really successful in her businesses, and the deceleration I struggled with, and I really leaned on journaling. I don't know why. I always kind of thought it was a bit rah-rah. And I mean, look at me. I'm not the type of guy who looks like he is in tune with his feelings. You know, I've got the caveman thing going on. I'm aware, and I don't write much, but I've started leaning into this this journaling thing, and I just write every morning. I just write down, what am I grateful for, as you said. But I think it's important to really feel it. That's the difference, because it's easy to say, my family, my son, I've got a roof over my head, but you've really got to feel it. So I just take a couple of minutes to really feel that. The other one I've started adding in is, what am I grateful for on someone else's behalf? So being, like I say, grateful, thankful, or just celebrating somebody else's win. Which has been, I like seeing my friend. I like seeing winners win. That's my thing. Just because you're winning doesn't mean I'm losing. It doesn't come out of mine. So it might be that someone got a promotion, or they've had a baby, whatever it might be. So just writing down something you're happy that someone else got is really nice. And then I just keep it pretty simple. What am I excited for today? What am I going to execute today? And then what's on my mind? And it's normally just a few lines about whatever's going on in my head.
But you know what you're practicing there? You're practicing mindfulness.
Right.
And that is part of what we recommend in terms of getting in tune with that gut-brain interaction, and really centering yourself and being very mindful and very aware of where you're at and being present with your body. And actually, that is very much what we recommend for managing these gut-brain interaction conditions. So you're doing a lot of this stuff, and I think journaling, like you say, a lot of people sort of turn their nose up at it, but it's such a powerful tool, and it's something that you're in control of, and it's very private, but you can get a lot of emotion out on a page in a very simple format. So no, I'm totally with you there. I think I recommend it a lot. I just don't think people know how to do it. I think people think it's some sort of, I don't know, in the yoga and Pilates corner where it's very complex and you have to be very zen with it all. No, sometimes it can just be scribbling a few things down on the page, sending that text to a friend, appreciating the support you've got around you. I think there's a lot to be said for just being thankful for stuff. It really grounds you. It really makes you remember what life's about sometimes, doesn't it? Without getting too deep.
Yeah, no, I agree. And some people do turn their nose up at it. And I get that. I used to. But that mindfulness, I think, is really, really important. It's the same reason I do cold exposure every morning. I either plunge or I shower cold, because I think it got hyped up, and we are going off on a bit of a tangent here, but it got hyped up hardcore on social media over the last couple of years about if you don't get cold every morning, you're a failure, and it does all these things. Truth be
Yeah.
told, actually, it doesn't do an awful lot. But one thing it does do for me is I don't want, firstly, the dopamine boost immediately just puts me in a good mood. And secondly, it's a little win. I don't want to do it every day. I'm like, for fuck's sake.
Got nothing. Got to get cold again.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I do it, and I'm like, cool. That's a little micro win.
Yeah,
All about stacking wins. Nothing builds momentum like momentum.
Absolutely. My brother does it, and I did think it was odd that he asked for a full-size bin for his birthday. And I was like, why? And he was like, for my ice bucket. I was like, of course. He said it's easiest because it's on wheels. I was like, okay. But he totally swears by it as well. And yeah, I think whatever you need to do to ground yourself, get yourself in tune with what is important is right on the money for improving your gut brain axis in work, and then in turn, if you've got that boost of those good happy hormones, that can improve your gut microbiome, that can improve your symptoms. All of it is, these are things are not instant. You know, one ice bath and one yoga session and one bit of journaling isn't going to do this overnight. The way you have to do these things over many months and get it to a point where it's your norm. And I think that a lot of people are really hoping for a quick fix with gut microbiome and gut health. If you think the chronic stress and how long, if you're stressed over a long period, it can take weeks and months for you to really start seeing the signs of it. Even just physically, if you think about people just looking very, very pale and, eyes looking dark, it can take months to get to that point. But it also can take months to get out of that. Because actually, if you're not sleeping well, if you're not eating well, it's a real chronic effect. That's why nutrition's a really hard one. You can eat terribly for a long time, but it's not until you've got osteoporosis 20 years down the line that you realize, oh, actually, maybe I wasn't having enough calcium after I was cutting dairy out for different reasons. A lot of the time, these are chronic effects. So you might not see the effects of some of these dietary restrictions until, I don't know, a future scan comes up, or another health condition goes, oh, hang on, that was to do with this. So I would say gut health is the same. It's a chronic thing. It takes many months. Even, I was talking about probiotics, take them for at least 4 weeks to even start to be in a decent volume to notice the difference. So yeah, long-term changes, being really patient with it. Because I do have some patients that after a year of really bad symptoms, a switch is flicked, there's a click and everything's fine. And we don't know why. Some people, it's literally as soon as that food is cut out, you're good. For some people, I've even had it where I had a woman that said to me, and it broke my heart a little bit. She said, I finally left my husband and I was in an abusive relationship for 20 years. And I'd seen her whilst they were still together and she hadn't disclosed that. So it wasn't until our follow-up appointment. And she went, the day that I left that house, my symptoms were fine. So don't underestimate the stress. And that was obviously a very big stress. That's a very, domestic violence is a completely different thing, but it does tie into perhaps what you were saying earlier about I've always got to be at a level of stress. There's a lot of my patients and my clients that will be at a certain level of stress, and until you learn to kind of get that lower, or something circumstantially changes, like exams finishing, progressing with counselling for whatever it is, it's not until you hit that turning point that perhaps that's when your symptoms improve. So I think there's a lot of food for thought in all of the advice. It's one thing isn't going to fix you. It could be a series of things altogether, but there could be a turning point that you're not aware needs to happen. But it's always something to think about. I think with stress, it's almost a bit of an underlying killer. If you think about stress and the effect on cardiovascular risk and diabetes risk and cortisol levels being raised, it affects everything. So yeah, it's a lot to think about, I think, with stress.
It is for sure. Last thing on sleep, I'm curious to know your thoughts on eating before bed. There's sort of some mixed data, I guess, whether it's bro science or anecdotal, but there's this kind of don't eat 2 or 3 hours before. There's people that say it doesn't matter. There's the argument that I've heard that I've heard both sides, people saying, well, because you're sleeping, you're not digesting as much because your body's at rest. And then there's people say that's not true. Your body doesn't just stop digesting. Look, where are we on this?
Where do we start? In a way, all of those things are true and none of those things are true.
Right. Okay.
I think from a medical perspective, I think I see a lot of patients with reflux and heartburn, and we know that eating in that last couple of hours before bed and then lying flat, you're more likely to have issues with reflux and heartburn. So I think I would always say try and leave a bit of time between finishing your meal and getting to bed, and 2 to 3 hours is probably about right. Partly because it does help with digestion. You've got a real gravity element there of it kind of physically going down and your gut then being able to move it along. Your gut will always still digest food. It takes 8 hours for the food to get from your mouth right down to your anus to then be sort of produced as a poo. So it takes a long time, so that it doesn't sort of stop digesting as soon as that light goes out. There's always an element of digestion going on. I think it generally, I would say it's probably slightly better to have a bit of a gap before bed. But if I'm honest, I don't know if there's any evidence for that. I think it's perhaps more just that's just what our routines are. But equally, if I said to you, oh yeah, of course, eat an hour before you go to bed, you probably start feeling quite bloated and get a bit of heartburn and a bit of reflux because of the positioning you're in. Everybody's different. And I suppose it depends how late you're eating. If you're eating at like midnight because you've had a really long, shift at work and you're coming home stressed and you're wolfing it down, that's more of a problem than eating late. If you had a really relaxed day and you're just having a late dinner and it's very casual, it's the circumstance that I think dictates whether it's okay or not. Because a late dinner that you're wolfing down after a stressful day and you're sat there in front of the TV doing it very mindlessly, it's that circumstance that I would argue is the problem with that. I think there have been some studies to say that certain vitamins might be more efficiently absorbed overnight. I remember being told that a few years ago by one of my
vitamin D they say take later in the day.
Pardon?
Is it vitamin D they say take later in the day? I've heard
no
that.
I feel like it was something like magnesium or iron or zinc or one of the minerals rather than anything else, but there's not enough studies on it to prove that it's more effective. And I think you're talking very marginal. I don't think having your vitamin D in the morning versus the evening is going to shift it. There may be some vitamins that, so there are some vitamins that are water soluble versus fat soluble. So yes, there may be some vitamins that are absorbed better with a meal because then it's being absorbed with the fat and that might increase absorption. So there are lots of other things that can affect it. I think you're probably maybe overthinking it if you're worried about the timing of the meals. But yeah, I would say try not to eat too late before you go to bed. I think there is an element of your gut needing to digest it. There's a lot of peristalsis that goes on. That's the contractions of your gut that helps to like move everything through. And when you're sleeping, your gut is, I say recovering because it's being damaged, but there is an element of your gut then produces, certain mucus to then help clear out what's left in your gut, clear the residue, help with that immune function. It helps to kind of reset the gut ready for the next day. It's almost a natural fast, isn't it? It just helps your gut to shut down. So when people say, oh, I'm doing a fast, I'm like, you kind of already do just by sleeping. Sleeping is fasting essentially, isn't it? So I would say just personally, I've feel very uncomfortable if I ate and went straight to bed. I think for me, that's what works. As with any advice I give, if what you're doing isn't causing you harm and actually you're getting what you need, who am I to be really strict to say, no, you absolutely need to be eating earlier? There are plenty of people that eat late and go straight to bed and there's no problems. But I think it's all about you and what's relevant to you. And ultimately, I'm a gastroenterologist. I'm always going to tell you not to eat too late because I do not want you to get heartburn and reflux. That's probably where I'm always on that side of the fence, really. I just don't want anyone to have that. That's probably my answer for it.
A super interesting take. IBS. I guess we know what it is, or the layman like myself, we know what it is. It's certainly something that I feel I suffer with on and off. I'm also dairy intolerant, so it took me a long time to figure that out the hard way. So I guess, can we start with like what is it? What is IBS to the layman?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I said earlier, it's classed as the disorder of the gut-brain interaction, but we also know that it's a condition of increased hypersensitivity in the gut. So what might be perceived as normal bloating for most people in someone with IBS, for some reason more reasons that we know now in terms of the gut-brain interaction, but for some reason for those patients with hypersensitivity, that simple bit of bloating translates into pain and discomfort and distress. And there is that increased hypersensitivity for all of your symptoms. So what we tend to find is that For some people, the causes are very different. And as we've already said, we know stress can contribute towards it, but we know that food can be a big trigger, because some of these foods can then contribute to the fermentation in your gut, which can then contribute to gas production and water delivery. And then that then distends your gut and then contributes to that pain signal to the brain. So it is a condition that is benign in that it is not cancerous, and it's not going to, ultimately lead to, your death. But it doesn't mean that the symptoms aren't relevant and important. And actually, they can be incredibly debilitating. To get that diagnosis, we always want to make sure we've ruled out other conditions. We want to make sure we've ruled out celiac disease, Crohn's disease, we've ruled out any cancer risk. So we always look at your family history, work out if there's any, family history of any bowel conditions that are concerning. And it is a bit of a diagnosis of elimination of other conditions. So some people find it a real fob off of a diagnosis. It's like, well, nothing else is positive, so you've got IBS, off you go. We're trying to make a positive diagnosis and be like, well, actually, yeah, you do have this, but there are management plans that we can put in place. So it's about explaining what can contribute towards it in terms of the stress and the diet and the sleep and the exercise. We know that higher BMIs, if you're overweight, there is more of a correlation with worsening symptoms. So actually, for some patients, it's about checking their weight and getting them under a weight management service whilst we do their dietary advice for IBS. So it is a condition that affects more women than men. I don't know if that's the effect of women perhaps being more open about their health problems. I know plenty of men, partners of my friends who only realised they had problems when they moved in with their girlfriend, who they then sort of heard every bowel movement going and went, that's not normal. So I wonder if there's a lot of men that are undiagnosed or just going, I can sort this out on my own. So it's, I think it's underdiagnosed in men, or undermanaged in men anyway. So yeah, but it's definitely a condition that over the years we want to change. We've tried to change the perception of. It isn't a fob off diagnosis. A lot of patients do feel fobbed off, but it is a long-term condition and we can't cure it. Yes, we can remove that food from the diet, but it doesn't remove the intolerance. So say it was lactose intolerance. By removing lactose, it doesn't cure the lactose intolerance. It just means that you're not triggering it off. And it's the same with any of these food triggers, stress triggers, any of these other triggers. We don't cure it by removing it, but we remove it to manage it. But it's a condition that I deal with every day. This is very much the focus of my NHS work, because I think there's such a inequitable access to care. And actually, it's a bit of a postcode lottery. And actually, I've spoken to Adam, always gets a shout out. Spoken to Adam loads about this. And, he said he's spoken with clients of his who have been told, oh, there's no dietitians that can help you with IBS. And Adam goes, well, no, there is, because I've met her. So it is one of these things where if the provision of the support for it isn't necessarily available everywhere, or it is and your GP just doesn't know about it to be able to refer you in. So it is one of these things where there's probably a lot more private dietitians around now that can support with IBS outside of the NHS, but there are some incredible NHS services around. So I'd always recommend starting with your GP, making sure you're really confident in your diagnosis and getting those baseline blood tests done. Like I say, celiac disease, rule that out, rule out any inflammation, because once you've got that diagnosis, that's your power. I think that people without the diagnosis just feel like you're going from pillar to post. So getting that diagnosis is crucial, making sure you understand it, understanding the different triggers, and then working out what the right management plan is for you. And that's what I'm really passionate about, is just making sure that these patients get the care that they need. Because it's so unfair to be told that service doesn't exist for you, when more likely than not, it does.
Fascinating. It's really interesting also to hear that it's not exclusively diet related.
Yeah, I think dietitians have always been sort of glorified therapists. We hear a lot of, we get a lot of people telling us a lot of stuff about them, and we know the importance of cognitive behavioral therapy and hypnotherapy in managing these symptoms now. And actually, there are some studies to show that hypnotherapy and CBT can be just as effective as elimination diets for IBS. So it's a really fascinating specialty to be in, and I absolutely love it, because I think we can get some incredible results. And genuinely, people that say to me, you've changed my life, and I'm like, but you've only cut out 2 foods. But they're like, yeah, but if it's not obvious to them, then how on earth are they supposed to how are they supposed to figure that out on their own? Just as a really easy example, he was one of the loveliest patients I've ever had, and his diet wasn't great. he was eating fry-ups and all this. So we went through the whole healthy eating thing. And it wasn't until I took his history on his fluid intake. Yeah, he had a couple of teas, a couple of coffees, but he was having 1.5 litres of apple juice a day. And I was like, that's just a laxative effect. The amount of sugar that's in that. Apples are a very fermentable fruit as well. It's like, I'm not going to lie. I think if you cut out the apple juice and just made your diet a bit healthier, you'll be fine. And he came back 6-8 weeks later. He went, oh yeah, I was absolutely fine as soon as I cut that apple juice out. But in his head, he was like, fruit juice, healthy, done. And I think a lot of what I'm dealing with now, and what actually we as dietitians in an NHS workforce, we're dealing with the fact that the government cut nutrition education years ago from syllabuses. My mum was a food tech teacher, so I had a really good baseline level of food. Like, my knowledge of food and nutrition was always at a pretty good level. And it wasn't until I started working that I realized people just don't get food. People are not taught how to cook. People are not taught what these nutrients are. So a lot of the time, even though, yes, I've got my degree and I work really hard to get all this really in-depth knowledge, the amount of healthy eating advice I give is a little bit scary sometimes. I'm like, oh my gosh, how do people not know this? Or they know it, but they just don't know how to implement it. And I do a lot of meal planning stuff. And I've been talking with my sister-in-law, Freya, who's a chiropractor, who I think you're in touch with. We talk about this all the time. She deals, with a lot of mums that are pregnant, new mums, maternal health is very much her area. And she gets a lot of people saying to her, I'm really struggling with the food side of things. And she then refers them on to me. And then we do a bit of a joint up approach with that maternal care. So for me, that meal planning, supporting people with really simple ideas, that's something that I do more than I ever thought I would do when I started doing dietetics. Get the basics right with IBS, and it really helps the rest of it. Because I give more healthy eating advice than my other bits of advice, I reckon, for IBS.
I'd love to hear your take on the food planning, the meal planning piece, particularly because I work for myself, so I do 2 or 3 shops a week. My diet is pretty samey, I guess, because that's how I'm quite regimented in that regard. And the fact that I can just go and do a couple of shops a week, I'd have to ask my boss if I just go to the shop. I need to go. So I'm conscious that I'm speaking from a slightly privileged position, but my client base predominantly is busy professionals. And when we first start working together, what we tend to find is it's not a time issue that they can't work out or food prep, or what. It generally is a schedule issue or a routine issue. They're not building it into their day as they should, and therefore they're not doing the shop. Then they're not outlining, we're going to have this day, this that day. So what's your take on meal planning? How do you approach that with your patients?
My approach to meal planning is, I think it's probably one of the most important part of your diet. Because the way I quite often explain it is, if you open up a cupboard and there's nothing there and you're hungry, you can't see the wood through the trees. You can't go, oh, actually, there's a bit of pasta there. I've got some frozen peas in the freezer. I'm sure there's a jar of pesto somewhere. I'm going to throw that together. You go, there's nothing there. I'm hungry. I don't have the capacity to think about this and be creative. I'm just going to order that takeaway. And I think if you're waiting until the last minute to decide on what you're eating, you're going to fail. We need routine and structure and prescription. If you think at school, we rely on our school timetables to tell us where to be and at what time and what to eat. And I think we don't necessarily get enough of that almost coaching on how to be an adult, and that you've got to think about it yourself. Like, mum and dad aren't there to do it for you. So I think for me, it's about acknowledging that you are the adult looking after you. You're the only one looking after you. You would never let your kids go without food. You'd never send your kid to school without a packed lunch, but you would do the same for work. You turn up to work without lunch and then rely on convenience food. So I think it's about really making sure people feel that they have a responsibility to look after themselves and feed themselves, and also understanding that we're simple creatures and that we need to be told what to do. Even if it was previous us that told us what we're eating on a Tuesday lunchtime, previous us has told us what to do, and that's okay. So I recommend going on like Amazon or going to wherever that you can find these things, like a magnetic like whiteboard fridge thing. So you've got like your meal planner on your fridge, or we've got a whiteboard in our kitchen. I just have this thing that I stick on, and it's got breakfast, lunch and dinner down the side. It's got like a notes column so I can add on when I'm in the office, and it just makes it so much easier to visualize it. We're very visual people as humans. We can't, if you expect to hold everything in your brain, you're going to fail. So I think having a really visual look at it, and nobody teaches us that. There's no lesson in school about how to meal plan. There's lessons on how to not get pregnant and get STIs, but there's no lessons on credit, like credit limits and how to save up, what savings are and how to meal plan and all the things that actually are really important now. So I always say, let's go back to basics. You would never send your child to school without a packed lunch. You are no different. And you're telling me that you have got these bowel symptoms, or you're feeling tired, you're feeling fatigued. Well, let's get you eating properly then, because that's never going to get better if you don't get this right. So I always say you need to plan out your meals. You need to think, where are my fruit and veg coming in? And sometimes actually for some people, they need to number them. I go, you need to say, which portion of fruit and veg is that? Is that 1 of 5? What is this? Because it's so easy to forget that, isn't it? Big bowl of pasta, whatever protein you want on top, and go, oh, hang on, I've forgotten my veg. I then also really go into the ease of meal planning in terms of like what's technically a processed food that is okay to actually rely on. Frozen peas, frozen berries, baked beans, some frozen chips, the chips that are literally just chips and oil that don't have all the extra additives in. Actually, on a day when you're struggling, fish fingers, chips and beans is a perfect meal. So it's about having a step back and going, do I have some stock meals available? I quite often, it was a girl I used to work with. She used to have a spreadsheet on her phone. And what they used to do, it was a shared document thing with her husband, and they had all of the meals that they liked. And every time they ate it, they'd have a tally on it. So it would go up a number. So that by the time it came to their next food shop, they go, oh, we've had that loads. Let's choose the ones with the lower numbers. And then they'd just choose those. And that worked really well for them, because then they could just go on ones they hadn't had recently. HelloFresh and Gusto and those meal prep boxes are fantastic. I quite often order them for when I'm getting back from holiday or a weekend away, so I don't have to think about it, and all then I've got to do is a quick nip to the shop to get lunch bits. So it's about working out what people's budgets are, because actually with some of those discounts you can get those for a pretty good value, and actually they're generally quite fresh foods. Yes, long-term use of some of these meal prep things might not be the best option, but if it works for you and it means you're eating better than the takeaway, then I'd rather you do it. I would also say there is a difference between planning your meals and meal planning versus meal prep. Because I think from the health industry and the gym industry, there's a lot of people that are going meal prep because I want to make sure I'm guaranteeing what my carbs and my proteins are. And that's very different to just making sure you've got a meal something to eat at every meal. So I think people do worry that I'm telling them to get loads of Tupperwares and, plan everything out. It's more just making sure you have something to cook when you get in, and making sure it's a really easy, convenient thing. I was talking to one of my cousins, just had a baby, and I was talking to her about this actually, because she saw something I put on Instagram about meal planning, and she was texting me going, oh, this is what I found really helpful when I've just had my baby. Make sure they've got marinated chicken in the freezer so they can just grab that and put that with whatever. So it's amazing how many people come up with little tips, and actually just listening to other people and what they do is so helpful. So I think just throwing ideas at people, seeing how it lands, but getting people to write it down. We are simple creatures. We need to be told what to do. And I think the visual meal plan is fantastic. And if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. So that's why I say get it on the fridge, get it on that whiteboard. Yes, you might want a nice clean aesthetic for your kitchen, but if you're not eating well, then the kitchen is not serving its purpose. Let's get that meal plan visible. So yeah, it's I'm very passionate about it, hence my 5-minute ramble on about it.
I love it. And for me, I've always been a headlines guy. And the big thing that stood out to me, that some great advice in that, some really easy to follow advice. The big thing for me was like, just be a grown up, like take some time, feed yourself. And yeah, I think that was really well put, really simple to follow. And I think if you're not doing those things and you're not able to implement what you've just spoken about, then I think it really starts to boil down to laziness or a lack of willing.
Do you know what? That's a really interesting one. The more I've worked with, I've been working in the NHS for more than 10 years now. Yes, there are some people that go into the lazy category. Absolutely. And there will always be people in our society that have lazier, attitudes to things. The thing that I see most commonly is people being overwhelmed, people being burnt out, people not understanding where to put a boundary in, perhaps with that work-life balance. The amount of people that are carers for elderly relatives, sick relatives, children with learning disabilities that they're then carers for, just to name a few reasons that some people just cannot look after themselves properly because they're too busy putting their lives into someone else. And that is why, for me, understanding who you live with, what your work setup is, who do you care for, who are your dependents, is such an important question for me, because it's easy for someone to look lazy, but if they had a mental breakdown last week and you're lucky that they didn't actually end up being committed, admitted to the psychiatric ward, then actually me going, yeah, come on, let's just get that breakfast right, that's a big step. So I'd say yes, there will always be lazy people in this society. It's the world we live in. But I think I'm picking the barriers to change, and that's, as dietitians, what we're trained to do when we are at uni. What are the barriers to change? What is the barrier to somebody taking your advice to get their health in a better place? Because I've genuinely got patients who say to me, I cannot engage with this right now, I'm about to cry. And I had someone cry to me throughout most of their appointment earlier today. Sometimes people are just so overwhelmed, they cannot see the wood through the trees. So yeah, I would always, I never judge, because you just don't know, you never know what someone's going through. And also you can tell the people that are just being lazy because they're just that who they are. And you just go, well, here's the advice, you can do what you want with it. But as a society, yeah, we probably get a bit lazy with our diets. We're the only humans that are going to look after us. I'm the only one that I'm completely responsible for. And since I've had that attitude shift, I think my diet, as a dietitian who's been working in NHS for 10 years, has shifted. Do you know what I mean? Even as healthcare professionals, there's plenty of doctors and nurses that have their own problems going on. Just because you work in that health industry, and same for you, just because you work in the fitness industry doesn't mean everything's perfect. It just means that you work hard to get there. And actually having access to colleagues and friends that have gone through similar things, sharing ideas, sometimes it helps to get you more motivated again. I need an accountability person for the gym. By telling someone I'm going to the gym, I need to meet them there so they see me there, and that's what motivates me. And I know how important exercise is, but I need an accountability buddy for that. And I think sometimes we put in it with food. It's like, look what I've made for my dinner, or look what I've got on my meal plan this week. It's that sort of sharing recipes, ideas as well, isn't it? So yeah.
That's really empathetic take, and I appreciate that, and I agree. There's some there are some circumstances where it absolutely isn't laziness. My take is if you do have the freedom and you're not attached to that, like at some point you have to kind of be a grown up and take some responsibility. I'm conscious of time, but I do want to touch on a couple more points with you, if we could just kind of whistle through them. You've talked a couple of times about burnout. How does that impact either our relationship with food, our relationship with preparing and eating or planning, or just our gut health in general?
Yeah, well, it very much ties into everything we've spoken about in terms of that gut-brain interaction, because if you are burnt out, your stress levels will be high. That will then affect how your gut microbiome's working. It increases your sensitivity for pain. Your serotonin production can then be impaired. That will affect your sleep. Lack of sleep impairs your judgment on food, your ability to cope. It all comes down to capacity with burnout, because once you're at the point of going, I just don't know where to go from here, sometimes you always have to hit the bottom to come back up again, don't you? And I feel like with burnout, sometimes that happens. People get so overtired, overworked, way too stressed, and then things fall apart and you have to rebuild them well. And I think it's about understanding what the main stressor in your life is. And yeah, your burnout will just mean that you have got no motivation. You can then appear like you're being lazy, because actually you just do not have the energy to even get off the sofa. I know that there's a lot of people that burnout might mean different things to different people. I know that there are some people that have chronic illnesses and they feel very burnt out after a bit of a flare up of their illness. For some people it is just we're on the rat race and we're in that brutal 9 to 5, but hamster wheel of life. So I think it's with burnout, it's one of those ones where sometimes someone else needs to point it out to you before you can then make the change. then I do that a lot. I go, I don't think you're coping very well. Something's not right here, and I think we need to have a look at things and work out what we can do to help you move forward. So burnout is in the same category as stress, as anxiety, as depression. It's sometimes it's an accumulation of all of those together, perhaps, and then it has a direct effect on things. And yeah, it'll affect your food choices. We're all prone to a takeaway after a stressful week, but if that's your week every week, and you've had that kebab for lunch, and you've had that takeaway again at lunchtime, or you've nipped to the cafe at lunch at work, then yeah, it's just a bit of a revolving door. And until someone gets you out of that revolving door, you quite often tend to be stuck in it. So yeah, meal planning, reaching out for support, working out what your support network is, working out what you can do to get out of it. I think that's always what I'd be advising and supporting people with. So it's a bit of a brutal world we're living in at the moment. So I think a bit of a kindness and support goes a hell of a long way.
I agree. A bit of compassion. Something that I really surprised at from this conversation is that this hour-long chat we've had about gut health, I'm surprised how much has come up that has not been directly gut related.
Yep.
That's been the biggest shock for me, is that we've discussed managing your stress, managing your sleep.
Yeah.
We haven't really talked about exercise, but I'm sure it plays a significant part. We've talked about your community, and having your tribe and accountability. This is probably a bit of an unfair question, and you can tell me if this isn't, if you can't answer it the way kind of I'd like you to answer it. Is there a percentage when it comes to gut health that is directly gut, what goes in, versus all of the other external factors?
It totally depends on the patient, because I can genuinely have patients that I give a diet sheet to and say, for some people it is lactose, and it's literally as simple as cutting that food out and their symptoms are gone. And there are some people where it's a combination of all of those factors we've just spoken about, whether it is stress, diet, antibiotics, gut health, all of those things. So no, I would say there are a lot of our patients that it is as simple as the food. And the low FODMAP diet, which we haven't really touched base on, that is the one diet that we know there's really good robust evidence for helping with improve IBS symptoms. That works for about 70% of the patients that we see, and that's what's been shown in the data over the years of the research of that diet. So there is still 30% of patients that just food alone won't do it for them, improving their symptoms. So 70-30 is probably a fair generalization. But within that 70%, there will still be people that will benefit from the gut-brain axis work, from losing weight, from probiotics. But it's a real mixed bag. I would say a lot of our patients, it's a bit of everything. And that's where we want to have that positive diagnosis and understanding that it's a multifactorial kind of condition, and that you may end up tapping in and out of certain therapies at different points. You may do the diet initially, but then the stress might come in 10 years later, and then you need to manage the stress element of it. And then you don't need that as much because the stress has gone down. So it's not as simple as a one-time fix and off you go. It's quite a linear journey, and it is a long-term management plan. So it's making people aware that there is we are whole people. This isn't just about food. It's a huge part. Of course it's about food, but it isn't just about that. And like I said earlier, sometimes if you don't engage with the right therapy, you're not going to have that breakthrough. But what I will say is your gut is your second brain. Your gut knows what's going on. That is one of the most important things I think I want people to understand, is that if your gut's not happy, it will show.
Fascinating.
So, yeah.
One final question.
Yeah.
I kind of wrote this question while we were talking, because it kind of came to me, and it's a bit cliche and it's a bit cheesy and it's a bit of a silly question.
Yep.
You hear people of a certain generation, my parents' generation perhaps, say things like, "Oh, everyone's got a food intolerance." Now, back in my day, we didn't have food intolerances, and they've kind of got a point. Yeah. It seems that every day, nowadays, everybody's got kind of something. So, is it a new thing, or is it something that we just have a better understanding of? Do we have better access to, or do we have more access to food? Because my parents' generation are kind of the meat and two veg generation.
So That's a very interesting point. How many people do you know that go, oh yeah, my dad always had bowel problems, my nan always had a funny tummy, or my auntie's always struggled but never had a diagnosis? I get that a lot. There's a lot of people when I say any family history, and they go, no, but pretty much every grandparent had something wrong with their bowels, but it was never diagnosed. There is, I suppose, a generational generalization, perhaps. There is a generation of people that just get on with it, shut up and get on with it and don't report it. I think there's a big shift in people being more open about bowel conditions these days. There's a lot more social media presence and things like that. And like I say, there's a lot of people that it's not until they perhaps find a new partner. A lot of men in their 20s come through my clinic going, oh, my girlfriend told me that's not normal. But my mum and dad always had bowel problems, so we just thought it was normal. Right. So it's amazing what the shift in normality has become. I don't think it was less prominent. I just think people were less open about it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of conditions that you've seen the numbers skyrocket with, and yeah, you know, even things like celiac disease and Crohn's disease and certain cancers. You're thinking, oh, hang on, what's the thing that's making that go up? And yeah, there could be an increase in processed foods, health foods being a bit of a confusing one for people, thinking it's healthy and then actually it's something that's contributing to their symptoms. We see it all the time. Oat milk's a really good example. Oat milk is not an unhealthy milk, but it contains a very fermentable sugar. And what everyone that's dairy adverse or intolerant or vegan or vegetarian, everyone goes to oat milk. And then everyone goes, oh, I'm having really bad diarrhea. And I'm like, well, it's probably the oat milk. But it's one of these things where you have to, I don't think it's less present. I just think there are potentially more open conversations about it and potentially more access to foods that contribute to it as well. Historically, that meat and 2 veg thing, that was a very restricted diet. If you think about it, there's a lot more variety now. So I wonder if it's just more obvious because there is more variety in the diet and more international foods coming over. I'm sure my grandparents probably would have been like, what on earth is this lentil? What on earth is this chickpea? They probably never saw any of these, lentils and legumes and things like that. So I think there's a big influence on our, how international we are as a culture now, as a country. Yeah, lentils everywhere. All the vegetarians are eating them. IBS trigger, more obvious. I think it's just more obvious and different. We're looking at it through a different lens, I think.
Great take. Emma, I think you're brilliant. I think the way you communicate your points is fantastic with so much passion. You have this really wonderful ability to just break it down in a way that is understanding, but also really compassionate as well. Super grateful as always for you to take the time out and come and have another chat with me.
No,
I haven't mentioned this to you yet, but there might even be a part 3 because I just think there's so much to cover here, and I know it's adding so much value. So maybe that's a conversation for off air, but
it's so lovely. No, it's so lovely to talk about it. And as you know, we've been here for over an hour now. I really could talk about it all day, and I just think it's such an interesting topic, and it's so relevant to more people than we think. And I, just from doing my private stuff and being more present on Instagram, I get so many people reaching out to me, asking me questions, just like, oh, can I just get your opinion on this? And I'm just so glad that what the knowledge for me seems like really normal knowledge is actually able to help other people. So I hope that somebody's learned something from today, and something that might maybe get them to reach out to their GP to get that diagnosis, or go and see a private dietitian, whether it's me or someone else. The help is out there, and it's just making sure that you feel confident enough to go with the person that you think is going to give you the support that you need. So but thank you so much for having me to speak. It's been great to talk.
Pleasure's mine. Just before we go, give a plug to the socials. How do we find you? Where are you?
Yeah, so on social media, so on Instagram, I'll be under Emma Dietitian, and you'll be able to book appointments through my booking page. I'm sort of a co-founder of a dietitian business called Gut Intentions, and so we offer everything from IBS care, endometriosis care, fertility treatment as well. Well, not fertility treatment, fertility, nutrition advice treatments. So we'll be able to be accessed through Instagram.
Fantastic. Emma Stennett, everybody. Thanks again.
Thank you.